Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Slegaitis-Smith and this is a channel where we like to talk about writing, learning, and creating. Today we are going to be on the writing side, continuing with character building and diving into the world of relationships. I'm pretty sure that there's very few people out there who would say that relationships aren't important on some level. However, we need to take a closer look at what types of relationships your character may have, which will help them to both be more realistic and help them to build more motivations and goals. The first type of relationship we're going to be diving into is family relationships. This is the most basic kind because regardless of whether or not they are currently involved in the story, your character had a family at some point and they were probably important to them in some way. So you're going to need to dive into who their mother was, who their father was, who any extended family members were, and any siblings in order to start building up the base relationships that your character has. Our family is our first jab at the relationship world. It's where we first start to realize what relationships are like and start to learn how to build relationships with other people. Very quickly, we move into the friendship type of relationship, but the family is going to be the foundation for your relationships, which is why people always talk about having mommy and daddy issues is such a big deal because it kind of is. The way that you related to your family as a kid has a big impact on how you relate with other people later on in life. So you are going to want to not only develop what those relationships were like, but also think about how those relationships impacted your character as a child and then as where they are in your story currently. The next type of relationship your character will have is the friendship type relationship. The friendship type relationship is really important because, once again, it is a foundational type of relationship. Your two main types of foundational relationships are the family relationship and the friendship relationship. This is how your character is going to end up relating to all the people around them because it's where they start to define the type of people they like to be with and the type of people that they don't. So when you're developing early relationships and when you're developing current relationships, you need to think about those elements for your character. What are the things that would attract them to a person? What would make them want to stay away from a person? What makes a difference for your character between a person being someone who might be a friend versus someone who might be an enemy versus someone who might just be a neutral acquaintance to them? What would make them find one relationship more important than another? Examples being what makes a friend versus a best friend to your character. These are going to be very important for developing who your character is as a person and also what type of characters they are going to want to surround themselves with in the story as they're coming in contact with whatever challenges they're going to be facing across the course of your plot. The third type of relationship in your character's life is going to be the authority relationship. Everyone has authority relationships in their life, whether they like them or not. This can be governmental authority, religious authority, social authority, and we're going to dig into exactly what I mean there. So governmental authority is pretty straightforward. It is who is in charge in governmental positions. So this is going to be your king, your emperor, your president, your monarch, whoever it is who is in charge of the government in your story. And then also the governmental authorities underneath that, whether you're dealing with mayors or other types of governmental positions. If you're working in a fantasy or sci-fi world, you might be making up your own titles, but essentially whoever is in the governing type authority. Why is this type of authority important for your character? Because it depends on how they are going to have a relationship with the rules of their society. So very often, especially in dystopian literature, there is something to chafe against the governmental authority that makes the character want to do something to change the reality of the world that they're living in. So you need to think about whether or not your character would be in line with the governmental authorities, indifferent to the governmental authorities, or against the governmental authorities. And this is once again something that can start developing from childhood. Maybe they started disliking the governmental authorities when they were a young kid because something bad happened to their family because of the government. Either they came in and took land because they're the government and could do that, or maybe they threw the father or mother in jail for some reason. And so your character developed a dislike for the government because of how they were using their power. So that's why governmental authority is important for your character. The next type of authority is the religious authority, and this will vary in importance depending on who your character is and the type of world you're building. Certain worlds that you build might have a very strong religious presence of some kind or another, and therefore that authority would have a higher precedence in your character's life. Or maybe your character themselves is a religious person. They are very much attached to whatever deity it is that they're serving, and it is a central or integral part of who they are as a person. In which case, spiritual authority is going to have a much larger impact on them than someone who wouldn't be religious. For instance, if your character is very religious and the religious leader in their area, like the priest or whoever is in charge, whatever term you want to use, they would be more likely to want to be in line with that person and want to follow that person if they are very religious versus someone who isn't. Also, depending on how rose-colored their glasses are towards that religious faction, will depend on how much leniency they give that person if they turn out to be a corrupt religious leader versus one that's actually authentically good. So, developing your character's relationship with religious authority can be a very important part of the character building process, depending on how important religion is to the world that you're building. Social authority is a little bit more ambiguous as far as what can count as social authority, because it could be literally anything. It could be your character's teacher in school. It could be their friend group, peer group. It could be someone who is important socially in the area. Basically, it is whatever is going to be setting up what the social norms for your society are in your story. So if it's a specific person or if it's just a set of ideologies, both of those are social authorities. So you're going to need to figure out, one, if it's going to be a person or just a set of ideologies, if it's going to be both, and then how your character wants to interact with those social authorities. Do they agree with the things that the social authorities are putting in front of them? Do they chafe against them? Do they want to dismantle some? For instance, one of the most common ones that people talk about is like gender roles. Like, if your character is very attached to gender roles, are they going to try to maintain them? If they chafe very much against the gender roles, then are they going to try to change them? And that can be very important both to your character and to the society, and also to the direction of the plot, depending on how focused on the social authority realm you choose to be as a author. The last type of relationship we're going to talk about is the romantic kind. Now, this is the one that usually people think of first, which is why I kind of saved it for last. Because when we say relationship, all of us go to the flowers of romantic relationship. However, the first types of relationships we talked about are absolutely foundational for the romantic type of relationship. When you're building your friendships, you are finding out the type of person that you're interested in, which is key in figuring out who might be a romantic interest. Because if you don't know what attracts you to a particular person, then how are you supposed to figure out what you're really attracted to? And I know I'm thinking more on the intellectual and emotional level versus other levels. But what we're looking at here are going to be two parts of the romantic relationship: the successful romantic relationship and the failed romantic relationship. Because just like real people, your characters are allowed to have failed romantic relationships, but you need to know exactly why a relationship would be successful for your character or why one would fail. Let's talk about the failed romantic relationships first so that we can have the more happy one at the end. For the failed romantic relationships, you are going to need to figure out, once again, those foundational relationship items so that you can know what your character would be interested in, what would attract them to this romantic relationship. Because all relationships on the romantic side start with some level of attraction. It could be a physical attraction, it could be a mental attraction, it could be an emotional attraction. You're going to need to figure out which one of those is going to be what starts you off. But on the basis, there is that type of attraction. And usually it is because of the fact that the same type of person who you would want as a friend, you would want as a little bit more than a friend. So that is going to be your base starting point for building this relationship. Now, what makes a relationship more successful or more likely to fail usually, once again, is kind of grounded in that friend zone. Not that someone is friend zoned, but the more likely that your character would have this person as a good friend, a best friend, the more likely the relationship is to succeed. So, when you're building a relationship to fail, you might want to have a little less of those traits in there that would make this person best friend quality, because it will be harder for that character to stay in a positive and healthy relationship with someone who is not best friend material for them. So then the next phase of it is going to be the strengths to weaknesses category. The more likely a relationship is to succeed has to do with the way that the strengths and the weaknesses of the two characters complement each other. So, if your main character has a weakness, their romantic partner should have a strength that helps to make up for that. That's one of the things that builds a strong partnership between people. So, one of the ways that you can build a failing relationship pretty easily is for your characters to have the same strengths and the same weaknesses. One reason of that being, it is more likely that they're going to butt heads with each other if they have the same strengths and the same weaknesses, because it's much easier to see someone's strengths or weaknesses on the other person than it is to see it on yourself. So, for instance, if you have a character who is a little bit prideful, and they're in a romantic relationship with someone who's a little bit prideful, they will be faster to point out the fact that their romantic partner is prideful than to point to themselves and realize that they are prideful too. So, by having these strengths and weaknesses completely in line with each other, it will be more likely that they will run into relationship difficulties as well as possibly relationship failure. Another thing to build into relationship failure is goals. When you are a romantic couple, the best thing for your relationship is to have goals that are in line with each other. They do not need to be the same goal, but they need to at least be walking in the same direction. Because if your main character's goal is sending them over there, and the romantic partner's relationship goal is sending them over there, then they are going to be straining at each other to try to reach their goals, and they're going to be pulling each other back like an anchor. So, if you want the relationship to fail, putting goals in opposite directions is a great way to put extra tension on the relationship that might lead to that relationship's failure. Now, let's go into the successful relationship side of things. Basically, everything that I said about the failing relationships and setting up for failing relationships, if you do the opposite of that, you'll be more likely to end up with a successful relationship for your character. If you have strengths and weaknesses that complement each other, where your main character has a strength that covers for the romantic interest weakness, and vice versa, it is going to be a lot easier for them to work together as a team, and therefore more likely for their romantic relationship to also be successful. Making sure that they have goals that are in line with each other. Once again, they don't have to be the exact same goal, but they should be heading in the same direction in order to help them to be more successful in that relationship. And also, the best friend zone should be fairly well intact, where the romantic person should be best friend material. If they are not in a relationship, they should want to be best friends with the person. If they are in a relationship and that relationship does fail for some reason, they should still want to be in a best friend relationship with the person. Not that they necessarily stay happy-go-lucky friends the entire time, but that the consistency should be in the character of the person that they would want to be best friends with them. Now, maybe the relationship failed because that character fundamentally changed and they are no longer best friend material. That is perfectly fine. But for the successful relationship, they need to have that best friend material as a baseline that continues through. Because if you wouldn't want that person as your best friend, you're not going to want to keep them as your romantic partner. There's going to be things that they're doing that chafe against you so hard throughout your relationship if you would not also want this person as your best friend. That's one of the reasons why people like to say romantically, oh, I married my best friend. It's not just lovey-dovey stuff. It's because that person should qualify as your best friend if they're going to qualify as your romantic partner. It really helps in having a long-lasting, successful romantic relationship. And since when did I start doing dating advice? Because now it feels like I'm doing dating advice. But it's very important if you're going to do some romantic relationship for your character. Obviously, we could dive way deeper into each of these categories, but this is sort of just a glazing overview of relationships because first we need to recognize what the type of relationships are in order to actually build them correctly. So if you have specific questions about these different types of relationships, absolutely leave them in the comments below. Let's help each other out here. Feel free to respond to each other's comments positively and usefully. That way we can keep growing here as a community. If you want me to go more in depth in another video, absolutely leave that in the comments as well. I would love to go over material that you are interested in having me go over. It's kind of one of the reasons why I'm here. Other than that, I hope you had a wonderful time on this video and have a great one until the next one.